But the more I learned about conventional psychology, the more disturbing it was for me, because as I was learning this, and at this point I had moved into being a psychologist in the prison, and so the more I was learning about psychology and trying to apply these approaches, I didn't see that it was really making much of a difference with these guys. So I started teaching meditation then, and I started teaching them some of the other things I was learning about spirituality, and they responded to that, and it was making a difference. And I saw how dramatic it could be, the kind of difference it could make. And the same thing was going on in my personal life, where I was going through different changes and different relationships and so forth, and learning about my own personality and how my personality worked and my reactions and so forth. So, at some point, and this is why I say here that this is a gradual process, a little by little, for me, it was kind of little by little, my awareness was gradually gaining more ground, gradually gaining more ground. And at some point, it just got to a place where, and this is what I talk about in the book, Dying to Live. At some point, it just got to a place where, and this was near the end of my career in working in prisons. I had worked in prisons for 32 years. And at the end of my career, I was running a prison. I was the administrator who was the warden of a medium security prison. So it was toward the end of my career when something started to happen where I started to feel this constant fear, all day, all night, afraid. And the only way I could express it, I remember very clearly saying to my wife, the only thing I can tell you about what I'm experiencing is I feel like I'm dying. That's the only way I could conceptualize it. I feel like I'm dying. I know I don't have anything physical wrong with me, but nonetheless, it just feels certain that I'm dying. And this went on for a while. And then one day I specifically remember that a thought bubbled up in my mind, and the thought that bubbled up in my mind was, the you that is dying doesn't exist. And for some reason, I had read a lot of spiritual material up until that point, and it never really sunk in that was the case. So this thought bubbled up. The you that is dying never actually existed. And when that thought bubbled up, it was like that was the death. That was the death. The death of my personality, because the personality never really existed. And it wasn't even that this was a conceptual process. Somehow, these things aren't necessarily explainable all the time, but somehow all this accumulated and added up to something that occurred that way. And once that happened, something shifted. And after that shift occurred, nothing was the same. Everything looked the same to me. I didn't feel the same way as far as who I was concerned. And things went on from there, it was but there was definitely a turning point there when something happened. I can't, these things are non-conceptual, so you can't really talk about it, but something definitely happened, and after that, there was definitely, everything was different after that.
But it took a long time to get to that.
It took a long time to get to that place, yeah. But the thing about it is, one of the things I say here in this class is that don't aim for the instant, enlightenment. Don't shoot for that. That's not, in a lot of the traditions in Buddhism, they actually, in Soto, for example, in Soto Zen, they actually discourage people from attempting to be enlightened. They say, don't do that. Don't have that intention to be enlightened. Because the reality of it is, the dynamics that are involved in this, that result in this happening, can't be understood because they're non-conceptual, right? And so the way it happens is only something that we have vague understandings about, right? But we know that for some people, it happened instantaneously, but we also know that for most people, it's a very gradual process. And so I say that the way to approach this is to approach it from the gradual process. And if you do that in earnest and you do the meditation and you really learn how to meditate and you really make a commitment to being a student of understanding the wisdom teachings, if it's meant for you to be enlightened and that's going to happen, it'll happen when it happens. It'll happen when it happens. But you can't approach it that way. Right? And then one of the things that you come to understand that helps you not to approach it that way is the recognition through the teachings and understandings that what you're attempting to experience is always already happening. That's such a key thing to understand. You know, that you are already there. This is already true, right? And so all that we're really dealing with is moving the obscurations. You know, removing that which is clouding it, you know, coming to an understanding of how it is that could be true, but it's not the way it's occurring for you. It's not the experience you're having. And then out of that comes all the understandings that, as far as I'm concerned, are not yet necessarily complete in the East in terms of understanding how the personality develops, you know, how that development of the personality takes over, right, and hides the truth about what you are as awareness itself. I don't think in the Eastern traditions they necessarily had that great of an understanding of all that. That's more like modern psychology, right? But they had the practices and they had a certain way of understanding everything that did work, at least to the extent that there were a fair number of people that went through that came out of it enlightened or came out of it self-realized or came out of it knowing the truth about who they really are. So yeah, it's a gradual process, but I think one of the ways to deal with it is to understand that it's called transcendental wisdom, right? What's the transcendental aspect of the transcendental wisdom? Or even in TM, what's you know, transcendental meditation, transcendental wisdom? What's the transcendental aspect of it?
You go from thinking you're your thoughts to awareness.
Well, yeah, but you see, so the wisdom part of it is the understanding of the whole thing, right? The transcendent part of it is the recognition and the realization that you already are what you are attempting to experience. So transcendence means the implication of that, right, is that there is nobody here to suffer. The implication of that is it's possible in any circumstance in your life to transcend that circumstance and experience it from a place in which there's no suffering. That's the transcendental aspect of it. It has to be transcendental because who we are is already who we are. It's not, right? Therefore, it's possible to transcend the idea we have about who we are. It's possible to transcend the limited way we're seeing things. It's possible to transcend our emotional reality, yeah, to a place where you're seeing it from an awareness perspective. That's transcendental. And when you're seeing it from an awareness perspective, part of the natural reality of the awareness is that it has unconditional acceptance. You know, I was listening to Ramesh today talk, and it's interesting because in this particular conversation he was having with somebody, he literally defined enlightenment as the recognition that you're not a doer. And this isn't a guy who just, you know, was playing around with this stuff, you know. He spent years being the translator for one of the most famous gurus in the world, right? And in that process experienced self-realization, right? But having experienced self-realization, he recognized that the essence of what it means to be self-realized is to know that you're not the doer. That's the essence of it, right? Why? Because if you're experiencing not being the doer, then the experience you have of reality is unconditional acceptance. See if you can get that. If you have the experience of not being a doer, then you're experiencing unconditional acceptance. And if you're experiencing unconditional acceptance, can you suffer?
think there's pain that can still be present, but I think the suffering is greatly decreased.
Well, the suffering, if you fully realized who you are, there is no suffering by definition. Because suffering means that the way you're relating to whatever it is, whether it's physical pain or any circumstances, right, is that this isn't right, this shouldn't be happening. That's the suffering. So that doesn't mean that physical pain doesn't hurt. It hurts as much as it hurts, right? But most of humanity that suffers from physical pain suffers a tremendous amount of unnecessary psychological suffering. Because they're maintaining the idea that woe is me. They're maintaining the idea that why me? Why is this shouldn't be happening. And it operates on an automatic level. You understand? This is the conditioning. Your brain is conditioned to reject reality. Your brain is conditioned to reject reality. But there are ways to work with pain using the awareness that can diminish the experience of the pain, and depending upon the person, how far they take it, right, can disappear the pain completely. The possibility is there for that to happen. It's not going to happen unless you do the practice and you do the work necessary. See, that's one of the places that there's a lot of confusion. The yogis are interested in things like that. The yogis are interested in flying. They're interested in out-of-body experiences. They're interested in parapsychology, right? And so the people that go and for the most part, this is not the whole story, but for a lot of the people who went and isolated themselves and lived in the caves, they're working on becoming psychic. And so they needed to not have any interference with that process. And it's possible to succeed in becoming psychic and becoming a yogi and do all these things, right? But the transcendental wisdom teachers say that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And that's one of the reasons why the teachers tell the students who are practicing psychology and developing these understandings, when you have unusual experiences, which are common for people when they go through this process, right? When you have unusual experiences, do not get attached to them. Do not think it means anything. Do not call it enlightenment. Just continue with your practice. If you want to if you want to work with the pain using awareness, right? The way that work works, right, is you do the opposite of what people do, right? Which is not easy to do, right? But instead of trying to escape from the pain, you go towards it. You go towards it. You go towards it, and you rest your awareness on wherever the pain is, and you look to stay on, to keep your awareness and your attention on the pain, and just keep experiencing the pain, right? And one of the things that's true, it's just a reality, right, is that this is one of the things I'm sure Einstein saw, right? That the theory of relativity is not just about the speed of light. The theory of relativity is not just about the speed of light. If you are experiencing anything exactly the way the thing is happening, at the same time it's happening, it doesn't show up, it disappears. If you're experiencing something when it's happening at the same time it's happening as it actually is, right? In other words, one way to think about this is if you use the speed of light to think about it, right? The idea of relativity is that if you could travel at the speed of light, time would stop, right? Because time is the speed of light, okay? So just look at it this way. What if you could travel at the speed of experience?
There's no experience.
There's no experience, right? So it is possible to, and this is what Balsakar is talking about when he talks about unconditional acceptance. Just fantasize. This is why it's important to contemplate these things. Just fantasize. If you were experiencing unconditional acceptance, that in itself is hard to fantasize, but possible enough to get a sense of it, right? If you were experiencing unconditional acceptance, meaning that nothing could be wrong, nothing can be wrong, right? Your nature as awareness is that way, right?
But then nothing could be right either.
That's right. Nothing is right and nothing is wrong. Nothing is right and nothing is wrong.
That's just isness.
That's right.
Non-duality.
That's right. If you could experience unconditional acceptance, right, you couldn't suffer. It would be impossible to suffer. How could you suffer? There'd be no difference between what you were experiencing and the way it is. There'd be no difference between what you're experiencing and the way it is. It'd be just like the speed of light. You're traveling, you're experiencing things exactly the way they are, just like you'd be traveling at the same speed of light, and time would stop. Time would stop. That's the natural state. So when we talk about acceptance, you can talk about acceptance as a personality accepting things, right? Psychologically accepting. You could practice accepting things. You could do that, right? You could get good at it. You could be better at it than you were, right? But that's still not the way it is for the actual self. Awareness doesn't accept or reject. It's beyond that. It's beyond accepting or rejecting anything. It just is. It just is. It stops there. It stops at just is. Just is in relationship to whatever shows up, right? And no matter what shows up, its presence, the presence of awareness, stays exactly the same at all times. It's like a mirror, right? It's like a mirror. If you look in a mirror, the mirror can only reflect back to you what's being presented to the mirror. It doesn't change it, right? The mind takes what's being presented to it and changes it all the time, constantly. So you're never in contact with things as they are. You're always only in contact with the interpretation of the way things are. But the awareness is always in contact with the way things are. You see? And you are that. You are that, and you have forgotten you're that, and became something that is in the field of awareness instead of awareness itself. Or you identified yourself with something that's in the field of awareness instead of awareness itself, right? And that's why when we practice meditation, you're practicing being yourself. You're practicing being yourself. When you practice meditation and you're practicing being yourself, you're practicing stopping the process that has you not be yourself. You're practicing moving your awareness out of the process that has you not be yourself. Because the process that has you not be yourself is thinking, isn't it? Yeah, that's the process that has you not be yourself. So you take attention out of the process that has you not be yourself and experience what it's like to be yourself, the awareness of the body breathing. Well, it's like Paul Hederman said, the only value he could find, and I agree with this, the only value he could find in all of the conditioning and education that goes on around the world, not just here, is that it demonstrates what a failure looks like. That's the only value. The only value of the current situation we find ourselves in is that it doesn't work. If you realize that, you're getting somewhere, right? But if you think it works and you keep trying to make it work, that'll be your life.
Looking for a purpose.
Yeah, what do you gotta look? How far do you gotta look for a purpose? You're here. You wake up in the morning, you're here. What's the purpose? You're here. Well, yeah, but you see, that goes back to what I said earlier. If you can look at that and recognize you're suffering, right? Then you begin to seek for some answer to that suffering. And if you're fortunate, you'll come across the teaching and the practices. That's what the teaching and the practices are all about. And if you see that, especially if you've been suffering, that's why meditation and these teachings are very attractive to people who are suffering, right? Because they promise you they promise you a way to get free from that. They promise you a way to get free from that. But you can't, but the way to get free from that is not available unless you, first of all, develop an understanding of what the situation you're in is. The solution to the problem is not available until you develop a clear understanding of the situation you're in. Once you have a clear understanding, once you know that you, like the rest of humanity, is ignorant, and you're suffering, and you're crazy, and you're confused, now you got something to work with. But if you're in the middle of all that shit, right, and you're still trying to make enough money to get the next new car or find another relationship because this one doesn't work anymore, that's a never-ending rat race. You can keep doing that the rest of your life, right? And if you watch enough TV and if you hang out with the typical people in the world, you will do that the rest of your life because the people in the world, the people that are dominating this planet right now, right? The human race, right, is ignorant and lost and confused and suffering and destroying everything, right? So that's one of the problems that you're dealing with this, is because if you choose to take this on, not only do you have to deal with your own mind, you have to deal with the world. You live in a sick world, right? So you have to deal with that, right? It's possible to do it in spite of the circumstances we find ourselves in, right? One of my favorite teachers said, you and I have the natural ability to transcend the circumstances we find ourselves in life and experience the possibility of well-being and happiness. That's just the way it is. That's a real possibility. I work with people in prison that get, and not all of them, right? Because as you well know from coming here, this is not free lunch, right? So they had to do the work. But there were people who I met in prison that were really willing to do the work, and a prison could be a monastery if you know how to use it, right? Because you don't have to go to work. They're serving your meals, right? You have a place to sleep at night, right? And if you're smart, you know how to work the system, right? It doesn't have to be that difficult, right? But unfortunately, a lot of the people that go to prison aren't smart and don't know how to work the system, and so they take a lot of beatings, right? But there are people that go to prison that are smart, know how to work the system, and are willing to do the work to wake up, and I saw it happen. I saw it happen. I saw people walking around behind a 30-foot wall that were happier than most people on the planet, and didn't care whether they got released. Didn't care. And when they went before the parole board, right, the parole board didn't know what to do. Because it was obvious they didn't care, and they were being completely honest, right? And so they released them. And then it turned into prison the way it is now, which is complete punishment. It's all punishment. There's very little opportunity to do anything but suffer. So, but the possibility is real no matter what the situation is, whether you're in prison or you walk around and you carry the prison with you, which is the case for most people. Most people, their mind is the prison, and they're walking around and they don't know they're in prison. So that's the first thing that has to happen. Like I say, you have to know you're in prison in order to stand a chance to get out. But if you think you're already free, you're not trying to get out. You're just doing what everybody else is already doing and continuing to do it with the hope that it'll work, without any evidence. The evidence is the opposite. The evidence is the opposite. A lot of people believe that money is the answer. But the evidence is obvious that that's not true, right? But people will ignore all the evidence and say, even if it's not true, I want to find out. Give me $1 million. Well, you're probably not going to get that opportunity, so you better get clear about the truth without it.